The Ghost in the Clearing. On the morning of February 20th, 1974, a young man walked into the jungle and pointed a camera at a ghost. The ghost pointed a rifle back. His finger sat on the trigger. This man had been hiding for 29 years. 2 nations had hunted him and failed. His own government had declared him dead. He was still fighting a war that ended before the young man was even born. And the strangest part is not that he was finally found. It is the question nobody has ever been able to answer. Did he already know? Hold on to that question. We are going to come back to it. But first, picture the clearing. It is hot. The air does not move. A river runs close by, low and brown. The young man is named Norio Suzuki. He is 24 years old. He dropped out of university. He has no weapon, no map worth trusting, and no real plan. He told his friends back home that he was going to find Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman, in that order. He said it like a joke. Most people laughed. Search parties made of trained soldiers had spent years combing these same hills and come back with nothing. And here was a kid in shorts thinking he could do it on a hunch. He did it in 4 days. Now he is standing very still because a rifle is aimed at his chest. The man holding it wears a uniform, not a costume. A real Imperial Japanese Army uniform, patched and repatched, the color of old leaves. The man is thin and hard, like rope. His eyes move the way an animal's eyes move when it has been hunted so long that it has forgotten how to be anything but hunted. He is 51 years old. He has not spoken to anyone outside his own tiny world in years. And in this moment, he is deciding whether to kill the boy in front of him. Suzuki does not run. Running would end it. Instead, he says something soft. He says in effect that the emperor and the people of Japan are worried about him. He uses the man's name. He says, Onoda-san. The rifle does not drop, not yet, but it does not fire either. That pause, that single-held breath in a jungle clearing on Lubang Island in the Philippines, is the door we are about to walk through, because the man with the rifle is Second Lieutenant Hiro Onoda. And to understand how he got to this clearing, to this exact morning, with his finger on that trigger, we have to go back. Back past the search parties. Back past the leaflets that fell from the sky like dead birds. Back past the friends he buried. Back to a quiet town in Japan and a boy who loved to dance. Stay with me. There are 3 things I want you to keep in your head as we go, because every one of them gets answered before we are done. The first is the problem. A war ends and one man refuses to stop fighting it. Not for a week, not for a year, for almost 3 decades. The second is the doubt. The whole world told him it was over. His country told him, his own family told him, in letters, in photographs, with their own voices. He decided every single one of them was lying. How does a sane person do that? And was he sane? The third is the part most people leave out. While he hid in those hills, people died. Real people. Farmers, fishermen, fathers walking to their fields. We will not skip them, because they are the heart of why this story still matters. To Japan, this man would become a hero. To the island below him, he became something else. They had a name for him. We will get to that name. So 3 threads. The problem, the doubt, and the dead. Hold them loosely. They will tighten as we go. A boy who wanted to dance. Hiro Onoda was born on March 19, 1922, in a small village in Wakayama, in central Japan. His family was the old-fashioned kind. Duty mattered. Honor mattered. Loyalty to the emperor was not a slogan. It was the air in the house. You grew up breathing it. But here's the part that surprises people. The boy who would one day refuse to leave his war was not, as a young man, some grim little soldier. He was the opposite. At 17, he left home to work for a trading company branch in Wuhan, China. He learned English, he learned Chinese, and by his own account, he had a good time. He danced, he went out, he enjoyed being young in a big foreign city, far from the strict rules of home. Sit with that for a second. The man we just left in the jungle, the human ghost with the dead animal eyes, started out as a teenager who liked dancing in a Chinese port city. Whatever turned the first into the second did not come from nowhere. It was built, carefully, by people who knew exactly what they were doing. In 1942, the war reached in and took him. He was conscripted into the Imperial Japanese Army. And almost at once, the army noticed something about him. He was smart. He spoke languages. He had nerve. Most conscripts get handed a rifle and pointed at a beach. Onoda got pulled aside for something special. They sent him to a school, not a normal one. You have probably never heard of this school, and that is the point. It was secret on purpose. It taught a very small number of men to do things ordinary soldiers were never meant to do. And the lesson at its center was so strange, so completely backward from everything else, the Japanese army believed that it would echo through this man's life for 29 years and help put a rifle in his hand in that clearing. Most Japanese soldiers in this war were taught one iron rule above all others: never be captured. Die first, die fighting, or die by your own hand, but never let the enemy take you alive. It was written into a battlefield code that every soldier carried in his head like a second heartbeat. The school they sent Onoda to taught him to break that rule. It taught him the opposite. It taught him to live at any cost, no matter the shame, no matter the years, and to keep fighting in secret behind enemy lines until someone with the right to do so came and told him to his face that it was over. That single idea planted in this clever young man is the seed of everything. The leaflets he would burn, the friends he would bury, the 30 graves on Lubang, the clearing, the rifle, the pause. To understand why Hiro Onoda could not stop, you have to understand the place that taught him not to. It had a motto. He never forgot it. And it was about to become the only thing he had left. The school that made a weapon. The school was the Nakano School. To be exact, Onoda trained at its Futamata branch, the Army's academy for military intelligence, sabotage, propaganda, and guerrilla warfare. Think of it as the place Japan built its shadow men, the ones who would not stand in a line and charge, the ones who would slip behind the enemy, vanish into the land, and keep the war alive long after the front had moved on. And here is the why. Because it matters for everything that follows. Most armies in this war ran on the same simple math. A soldier fights until his side wins or loses, and then he stops. Win, and you go home. Lose, and you surrender, or you die. Stopping was built into the job. The Nakano men were trained to delete that last part. For them, there was no automatic stop. There was only the order, and the order had to be canceled by a human being with the authority to cancel it. Until then, you kept going. A leaflet could not stop you. A newspaper could not stop you. A rumor could not stop you. Only a voice you were trained to obey. Do you see the trap forming already? They did not just train a soldier. They trained a man to ignore every signal except one. And then they sent him to an island and never came back for him in time. Onoda later wrote that the Nakano motto was, "In secret warfare, there is integrity," and that this kind of war, the quiet, patient, deceiving kind, seemed to fit who he was. Read that again. It fit him. The dancing boy was gone. In his place stood a man who had found something that suited him, and that something was a war with no clear end. This is the part of the story people rush past. So let us slow down and be clear, because it is the difference between Onoda and almost everyone else in this tale. After the war, more than 120 Japanese stragglers were eventually found scattered across the Pacific. Most of them hid for the same plain reasons anyone would: fear, confusion, shame at being beaten. They were lost men waiting to be found. Onoda was not lost. Onoda was under orders. That is the thing that makes him rare. And that is the thing that makes him dangerous. Remember that, because the longer he stayed out there, the more those two ideas would blur. Was he still following an order? Or had the order become an excuse? Hold that thought. We have an island to get to. One tiny island, one impossible job. On December 26, 1944, the army sent Onoda to Lubang Island. Picture it on a map, a thin sliver of land in the Philippines, roughly 18 miles long, about 93 miles southwest of Manila, covered in hills and jungle, and home to around 12,000 Filipino civilians who had nothing to do with the war Japan was losing. Keep those 12,000 people in your mind. They live here. This is their island. The man arriving by boat is about to spend half his life treating their home as a battlefield, and them, in the worst moments, as the enemy. His mission was clear, and it was big. The Allies were coming to take back the Philippines, and Onoda was sent to slow them down. His job was to wreck the island's airstrip so enemy planes could not use it, wreck the pier in the harbor so enemy ships could not unload, and destroy any plane or boat that tried to land. He was, in plain words, a one-man demolition and ambush team, sent to make Lubang as painful as possible for the people coming to free it. His final orders came from a major named Yoshimi Taniguchi. Write that name down somewhere in your memory, because 29 years from now, it will be the only voice on Earth that can end this. The order Taniguchi gave is famous, and you should hear it the way Onoda heard it, because he would replay it 10,000 times in the dark. Taniguchi told him, in the version most often quoted, "It may take 3 years, it may take 5, but whatever happens will come back for you." Then came the hard part. He was forbidden to surrender. He was forbidden to take his own life. He was told to keep leading his men so long as he had even one soldier left. And if it came to it, to live on coconuts. His own mother had given him a small dagger before he left, the kind a soldier was meant to use on himself rather than be captured. And the order he carried meant he was not even allowed to use it. Think about the cruelty of that. His mother handed him a tool for an honorable death, and the army handed him a rule that forbade it. He had to live. He had no choice but to live, and to keep fighting, and to wait. So now you have the machine fully built, a brilliant, hardened, language-speaking intelligence officer, trained to ignore every signal but one, ordered to never quit, never die, and wait for a man who promised to come back. Set loose on an island of 12 civilians. All it needed was for the plan to fall apart, and the plan fell apart at once. The mission that died on arrival. Here's the bitter joke at the center of Onoda's whole story. The great mission, the one he would sacrifice 29 years and 30 lives to honor, was never even carried out. It died almost the moment he stepped off the boat. When Onoda reached Lubang, he found officers already there who outranked him. He wanted to blow the airstrip and the pier exactly as ordered. They told him no. They argued the airstrip and the harbor would be needed, maybe for their own escape, and they pulled rank. So the demolition never happened. The airfield and pier were left intact, which helped the American and Filipino forces capture the island when they came ashore on February 28, 1945. Read that slowly. The one job Onoda was sent to do, he was blocked from doing on day one. By his own side. The failure ate at him, and in a strange and terrible way, that failure may be why he could never let go. He had not finished. He had not done the thing. Some men can lay down a job half done. Onoda was not built that way. The army had made sure of it. When the Americans landed, the fighting on Lubang was short and one-sided. Within a brief, brutal stretch, most of the Japanese garrison was killed, captured, or simply ran. The organized force that was supposed to hold the island evaporated, and when the smoke cleared, out of an entire garrison, only 4 men were left in the hills who would not give up. Count them with me, because these 4 are your spine for the next hour. Remember the number 4. There was Onoda himself, the senior man, the one with the order burning in his chest. There was Private Yuichi Akatsu. There was Corporal Shoichi Shimada. There was Private First Class Kenshichi Kazuka. 4 ordinary names, 4 men who walked into the mountains together in the early months of 1945 and did not walk out. One of them would crack and leave within a few years. One of them would be shot dead by a search party. One of them would be Onoda's closest friend on Earth for 18 years before a bullet found him too. And one of them, the last one, would still be standing in a jungle clearing in 1974 with his finger on a trigger. 4 became 3, 3 became 2, 2 became 1. That is the real countdown of this story, not how many he killed, how many he had left. And it starts now with 4 shadows climbing into the green, sure that reinforcements are coming, sure the war is far from over, and about to spend the next year learning a terrible new way to live. The first message telling them the truth was already on its way. It would reach them within months. It would be the simplest, kindest thing. Just a few words on a scrap of paper, and they would decide it was a lie. The first word from the outside. It came in October of 1945. Barely 2 months after Japan had actually surrendered, the 4 men were deep in the hills by then, learning to live like animals, when they crossed paths with another small group of Japanese holdouts, and that other group had something. A note, left behind by the islanders, written plainly, meant to be found. The message could not have been simpler. It said, in effect, the war ended on 15 August. Come down from the mountains. That was it. The truth, handed to them, free, in their own first months out there. If they had believed it, there would be no story. No 29 years, no graves. A nota would have come down a young man and gone home. They read it, they talked about it, and they decided it was a trick. Now you're probably shouting at the screen. How? How could they look at that and not believe it? And this is the moment you have to climb inside Onoda's head, because if you do, the impossible starts to make a horrible kind of sense. Remember the training. Remember the one rule that beat in his chest. Only a real order from a real superior can end this. A note on the ground is not an order. A note on the ground is exactly the kind of cheap trick the enemy would use to coax scared soldiers out of the hills and into a trap. To a normal man, that note is rescue. To a Nakano intelligence officer trained to read deception into everything, that note is bait. And they had what felt like proof. Their reasoning, the way Onoda later explained it, was chillingly logical. If the war was truly over, why were people still shooting at them? They had been fired on. They had been hunted. In their minds, a finished war does not come looking for you with guns. So the shooting proved the war was on, which proved the note was a lie, which justified more hiding, which led to more clashes, which brought more shooting, which proved the war was on, round and round. Do you see the loop? That is the most important thing in this entire video. It is a loop that feeds itself. Every piece of evidence that the war was over got turned, inside that loop, into evidence that it was not. The kinder the message, the more suspicious it looked. The more the world reached out, the more certain he became that the world was trying to fool him. This is not ancient madness. This is something every human mind can do. We call it, in plain terms, believing what we already believe. Onoda just had it weaponized by training, sharpened by fear, and locked in by the deaths of the men around him. He was not stupid. That is the frightening part. He was clever, and his cleverness became the cage. Late in that same year, the test came again, bigger. Leaflets carrying a surrender order from General Tomoyuki Yamashita were dropped from the air over Lubang. This was no scrap left by a farmer. This was a printed order from a Japanese general falling out of the sky. Onoda's group gathered them up. They studied them like the intelligence officers. Some of them were. They looked for mistakes, and they found what they wanted to find. They judged the leaflets fake and went on with the war. I want to stop here, because we are standing at the exact peak of the mystery, right before it pays off. If you want to understand how a sane, intelligent man can wall himself inside a war for 29 years, and you want to see the moment the cage clicks shut for good, do me one favor. Hit the like button right now. It genuinely helps this kind of careful, slower history reach more people instead of the loud, lazy version. That is the only time I will ask in the middle. Tap it, and let us get back to the jungle. Back to the jungle. The people below the hills. Because while 4 men were busy deciding the world was lying to them, the world below them was real, and it was about to start bleeding. We have spent this whole story so far up in the hills, inside Onoda's head. Now we need to come down the mountain, just for a while, and stand where the islanders stood. Because this is the part most retellings quietly drop. And dropping it is how a killer gets turned into a legend. Remember the 12-0 people. They farmed, they fished, they raised children and cattle and rice. And one by one over the years, some of them started to die. The 4 men in the hills were not on patrol against an enemy army. There was no enemy army. There had not been one for years. So when they raided for food, when they burned rice stores, when they shot at figures moving through the fields, the figures were farmers. The boats they fired on carried fishermen. The enemy guerrillas they ambushed were people walking to work. The official accounts, gathered from Filipino testimony, police reports, and death certificates, indicate that over the decades, Onoda's group killed around 30 islanders and wounded roughly 100 more. These were not soldiers. The people he attacked were civilians, unarmed and incapable of self-defense. They were not only shot, but also often stabbed and mutilated. Read that and let it sit. This is the other side of the loyalty everyone praises. The island learned to be afraid of its own hills. Fields near the high ground became dangerous to work. Families lost the people who fed them, and the islanders gave the unseen men in the mountains a name. They called them Demono sa Bundok, the devils of the mountains. Sit with that name for a moment, because we are going to need it at the end. To one nation, this man was a hero of duty and endurance. To the people who actually lived under his war, he was a devil who haunted the high ground. Both of those things are about the same man. Both are true at the same time. That is the knot at the center of this story, and we are going to keep pulling on it until it either tightens or comes apart. For now, hold one image. A father going out to his field in the morning, the way he had 1,000 times, and somewhere above him, in the green, 4 men who believe with all their hearts that they are still good soldiers in a noble war. One of those 4 was already starting to doubt. He had not signed up to murder farmers. He was tired. He was frightened, and he was about to do the one thing the others would never forgive. He was going to walk down the mountain and give himself up. 4 becomes 3. His name was Yuichi Akatsu, and he was the first crack in the wall. Living the way they lived would break almost anyone. So let us look at how they actually lived, because the daily grind of it explains why a man would risk everything to walk away, and why the others would never bend. The 4 men lived off the land and off other people's land. They ate bananas, coconuts, stolen rice, and cattle. They shot for meat. They never stayed still. They switched camps every few days so no one could box them in. They slept in the open, and sometimes in caves dug into the hills. They kept their rifles clean and dry, which on a tropical island in the rain is almost a full-time job by itself. Every day was the same shape. Move, hide, watch, find food, guard the weapons, sleep light, wake at every sound. For years, then for decades. Now imagine being Akatsu inside that. He was a private. He did not carry the officer's order in his chest the way Onoda did. He could see, more clearly than the others maybe, that something was wrong with the math. The reinforcements were not coming. The war they were fighting felt more and more like a war only they could see, and the things they were doing to stay alive were getting harder to call honorable. Akatsu broke away from the group in September of 1949. He spent about 6 months alone in the hills, which tells you how terrified he was of both choices, the group and the surrender. Then, in March of 1950, he gave himself up to Philippine forces. He walked out. He lived. As far as the world was concerned, that was the sane choice, and he made it. But to the 3 men left in the hills, it was not sanity. It was treason. The others regarded it as desertion and betrayal. And here's the cruel twist. Akatsu leaving did not crack the others open. It welded them shut. They did not think, maybe he is right. Maybe we should look harder at all this. They thought, one of us is gone, one of us is weak. We must be even more careful now. The doubt that should have spread instead made the believers dig in. 3 men now. Onoda, Shimada, Kozuka, and the second clock starts ticking under everything. Because once Akatsu surrendered and talked, the authorities knew for certain that men were still up in those hills. The hunt would never fully stop again. From now on, somewhere out in the wider world, people were always trying to reach them, and every single attempt would fail in stranger and stranger ways. The world reaches up and misses. This is where the story should feel almost unbearable, because help kept coming and kept getting refused. Watch how each attempt grows bigger than the last, and how each one slams against that same self-feeding loop and bounces off. First came the simplest things. Leaflets. We covered those. Fake. The men decided. Move on. Then came the personal touch. Over the years, families' letters and photographs were sent in to reach the holdouts. There were family photos, letters, newspapers, and even appeals over loudspeakers. Picture that. Speakers carried into the hills, crackling out across the trees, voices calling the men by name, telling them the war was over, begging them to come home. By February of 1952, photographs and letters from their own relatives were being placed where they would find them. And Onoda's training cut the wrong way every single time. He did not look at a photo of his family and feel relief. He looked at it the way an intelligence officer looks at a forged document. He scanned it for mistakes. He read deception into the love. A newspaper was a paper the enemy could print. A letter could be faked. A familiar voice on a loudspeaker could be a trick. A recording, a trap to fix their position. The more real and warm the message, the harder his trained mind worked to find the seam where the lie must be hiding. He said as much himself later. He admitted that by 1959, he and Kazuka had built up so many fixed ideas that they could no longer understand anything that did not fit them. That is one of the most honest and most frightening lines in this whole story. He is telling you, in his own words, that his mind had become a room with no doors. Anything that did not match what he already believed simply could not get in. And while that room sealed itself, the second clock struck its loudest hour. In December of 1959, the Japanese government officially declared Hiro Onoda dead. Think about what that means. The man was alive. He was up in the hills, eating coconuts, cleaning his rifle, certain he was a serving soldier in an ongoing war, and his own country had closed his file, written him off, held, in effect, a funeral. He was a ghost now even on paper, a dead man who did not know he was dead, fighting a war that did not exist, for a country that had stopped waiting for him. That is the loneliest sentence I know how to write, and he did not even feel it, because he never got the news, or if he did, he decided it was one more lie, a name in the fields. While Tokyo was filing him away as dead, the dying on Lubang went on. And here I want to give you one of the names the world forgot, because numbers are easy to skim and a name is not. On March 8, 1961, a farmer named Emilio Viana went out to tend sweet potatoes with his two young sons near the western side of the island. It was the day before his 53rd birthday. They worked the morning. He sat down for a break and a cup of coffee, and then the gunshots came. The first bullet shattered his thigh. Another struck one of the boys in the leg. The children dragged their wounded father into a patch of thorn bushes to hide, the thorns tearing at them, their fear bigger than the pain. That is what 30 islanders killed looks like when you slow it down to one family on one ordinary morning. A father, two boys, a cup of coffee, and 4 men in the hills who believed they were still soldiers. Emilio Viana has a great niece named Mia Stewart. Remember her too. Decades later, she would spend more than 10 years gathering this testimony, hunting down death certificates, making sure these names did not vanish under the legend. She would put it bluntly. He committed acts of terror against these people for 30 years. No one has ever asked for their side of the story, she said. We will come back to her, because she holds one of the heaviest pieces of this whole puzzle. For now, hold the father in the thorn bushes against the man cleaning his rifle in the hills. Same morning, same island. 2 completely different stories about the same event. One is about a soldier following orders. One is about a family bleeding in the dirt. 3 men were left in those hills. The clock was ticking down, and it was about to take the gentlest of them next. 3 becomes 2 of the 3 remaining men. Shoichi Shimada was, by the accounts that survive, the steady one, the corporal. The kind of presence a small, frightened group leans on without saying so, and he is the next number to fall. In June of 1953, Shimada was wounded. There was a clash with local fishermen, and a bullet caught him in the leg. Out here, a leg wound is not a small thing. There is no doctor, no clean bandage, no hospital down the road. A wound like that can turn bad and kill you slowly, in fever and rot. So Onoda did something that complicates every easy version of him. He nursed Shimada back to health. The same man capable of ambushing farmers in their fields sat with his wounded friend, tended him, kept him alive, and pulled him back from the edge. Hold both of those facts in the same hand, because the whole story lives in that contradiction. Devil of the mountains. Loyal friend. The same man. Shimada recovered. For a while there were three of them again, whole, watchful, dug deeper than ever into their war. Then came May 7th, 1954. On that day, Shimada was killed in a clash with a Philippine search and army unit. After nursing him through one wound, Onoda watched a second one take him for good. One of the three was gone, not by surrender this time, but by a bullet on a hillside. Two men now, Onoda and Kozuka. Stop and feel the weight of that drop. They started as 4 soldiers with a mission, sure that an army was coming back for them. Now they were two men on a hostile island, hunted, declared dead at home, certain against all evidence that a world war was still raging. Every death made the survivors more certain, not less. Because if the war were really over, they reasoned, why would men keep coming with guns to kill them? In their sealed room, every dead friend was more proof that the enemy was still out there. The grief did not open a door. It bricked one up. This is the thing about that self-feeding loop we keep circling. It does not just survive bad news, it eats it. Surrender becomes betrayal. Leaflets become tricks. A dead friend becomes evidence. The war goes on. There is no fact you can hand a mind like that which it cannot turn into fuel. And now the loop had only 2 people left to keep it burning. Onoda and the one man who would stay at his side longer than anyone. For 18 years, it would be just the 2 of them against a world that had stopped fighting. The smart man and his traps. Here's where I have to be fair to Onoda's mind, because part of what kept him alive so long was that he was genuinely good at this. He was not stumbling around. He was careful. He was a trained intelligence officer doing exactly what he was trained to do, and doing it well. He read the land. He read the patterns. When something looked too easy, he suspected it. A position that was too obvious, a path that was too open, an invitation that was too convenient. All of it tripped the wire in his head that said, "This is bait. This is a setup. Do not take it." That instinct kept him out of traps for decades. The same search parties that wanted to save him, he treated as hunters trying to flush him out, and he stayed one step ahead. But you already see the tragedy in it, do you not? The exact skill that kept his body alive also kept his mind imprisoned. The talent for spotting a trap is the same talent for inventing one where none exists. When everything is a possible trick, kindness looks like the most dangerous trick of all. His gift for survival and his inability to be rescued were the same gift, pointed 2 directions at once. So picture the rhythm of those years with Kozuka. Move camp, watch the trails, spot a leaflet, study it, judge it false, hear a voice on the wind, decide it is a recording, find a newspaper, scan it for the mistakes that prove it is enemy work, and always, always find them. Because a mind that needs to find mistakes will never run short. While they did this, the second clock kept running in the wider world, and the gap between his war and reality grew almost too large to picture. Japan was not a smoking ruin anymore. It was rebuilding into one of the richest, most modern nations on Earth. The emperor he served had become a symbol in a peaceful country. The empire he was defending no longer existed in the form he was defending. He was guarding a world that had already dissolved underneath him, like a man standing watch over a house that burned down years ago. And then, around 1965, something happened that the doubters of his story would later seize on. And you need to know about it now, because it plants a seed for the twist at the end. He got his hands on a transistor radio, a voice in a box. Somewhere in the mid-1960s, Onoda came into possession of a small transistor radio, taken in one of their raids. And he used it. He listened. Now think hard about what that means, because it is one of the cracks the counter-narrative drives a wedge into. He was not deaf to the outside world after all. He could hear it. Broadcasts, news, voices speaking of a Japan at peace. A Japan rebuilding, a Japan that was clearly, obviously not at war. His defenders say his sealed mind simply filtered all of it, that he listened to news of peace and decided it was propaganda, or twisted it to fit the war he believed in. the same way he twisted everything else. His critics say something colder. They say a trained intelligence officer, listening to years of radio, reading looted newspapers, holding family photographs in his hands, could not honestly have failed to understand that the war was over. They say that at some point, knowing and not knowing become a choice. We are not going to settle that here. Not yet. I am only planting it, the way the story plants it. The radio, the newspapers, the photographs. Keep them in a pocket. At the end, when we ask the hardest question in this whole story, we are going to take them back out. For now, two men kept their war. Onoda and Kozuka, bound together by 18 years of shared silence, shared danger, shared belief. They were the last true believers of a faith with a congregation of two. And in the early 1970s, the outside world was finally beginning to circle closer than ever before. Kozuka had been at Onoda's side for almost 2 decades. He was the last companion, the last witness, the last other voice that said, "Yes, the war is real. We are right. Hold the line." In October of 1972, that voice went silent. And when it did, Onoda became the loneliest soldier on Earth, the last friend. For 18 years, it was Onoda and Kinshichi Kozuka, two men, one war, one shared and unshakable belief. To understand the size of what happens next, you have to understand that Kozuka was not just a fellow soldier. He was the only human being on the planet who still lived inside Onoda's reality. The only one who agreed. The only one who would nod when Onoda said the war goes on. When you're the last two people who believe something, you're not really two people. You are one belief, split across two bodies, each one holding the other up. Take one away, and the whole thing should fall. Their world by the early 70s was small and hard and endlessly repeated. Move, watch, eat, raid, hide, and in October of 1972, during one of those raids, it ended. On October 19, 1972, Onoda and Kozuka were burning rice that islanders had harvested, the kind of raid they had done countless times, treating the farmers' food as enemy supply. This time, the local police were there. There was a shootout, and Kozuka was killed. 18 years. Gone in a burst of gunfire over a pile of rice that belonged to people just trying to eat. Two had become one. Onoda was alone now, truly alone, for the first time in this entire ordeal. No corporal to steady him, no private to share the watch, no last voice to agree that the war was real. Just one man in the hills with his rifle and his order and the self-feeding loop in his head that no one could reach anymore because there was no longer anyone beside him to even speak it to. I want you to feel how strange and total that loneliness was. He could not safely talk to another soul. He could not lower his guard for a moment. He had been declared dead by his own country 13 years earlier. The friends he started with were a deserter, a body on a hillside, and now a fresh corpse over a rice fire. And still, he held the line. He kept the war, alone. That is either the most stubborn loyalty in modern history or the most complete self-deception. The story refuses to let you pick easily, and that is exactly why it has lasted. The death that woke up Tokyo. Here is the part most people do not realize. Kozuka's death is the thing that finally cracked the whole thing open, but not in the way you would expect. It did not break Onoda. It broke the silence around him. Because when Kozuka was killed in October of 1972, it stunned Japan. Both Onoda and Kozuka had long been presumed dead, written off, filed away, mourned and forgotten. And now here was a body, a real, recent, identified body of a Japanese soldier, killed in a firefight in the Philippines in 1972, almost 27 years after the war ended. The math hit the country like cold water. If Kozuka was alive until last month, then maybe, just maybe, the other one was too. Maybe Onoda was not a ghost after all. Maybe the dead man was still up there, still fighting, still real. Suddenly, the hills of Lubang filled with searchers again. Japanese search parties went out, official ones, serious ones, calling his name, leaving messages, combing the slopes. His own relatives joined the effort. The government that had buried him on paper now desperately wanted to find him alive. And they failed, all of them. The trained searchers, the officials, the family, the calls over the loudspeakers, every coordinated effort by two governments came up empty. The devil of the mountains stayed exactly where he was, watching them hunt, certain to the bone that every searcher was an enemy trick, every familiar voice a trap. So the score, as 1973 turned into 1974, stood like this. The most powerful tools available: armies, governments, search parties, family, technology, had all reached for Onoda, and all of them had missed. And then a college dropout in shorts decided to give it a go. A joke walks into the jungle. His name, you already know, is Norio Suzuki. Born in April of 1949, 4 years after the war Onoda was still fighting had actually ended. He was a wanderer, a dropout. A young man who had knocked around the world with a backpack and a head full of restless ideas, the kind of person serious people do not take seriously. And his goal, the thing he told people he was going to find, was so absurd it sounds made up. He said he was going to look for Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman in that order. A lost soldier, a wild animal, and a literal myth ranked like items on a shopping list. He put the ghost soldier first, ahead of the snowman, like they were the same kind of quest. Everyone who had tried before him had something Suzuki did not have. Training, backing, weapons, authority. A plan, Suzuki had none of it. What he had instead, it turns out, was the one thing all of them lacked. He was not a threat. Think about it through Onoda's eyes. Every search party for 29 years had moved like hunters. Armed, organized, looking to flush him out and bring him in. To a man whose entire mind was built to spot a trap, all of them looked exactly like traps. Because in a way they were. They came to take him. Suzuki came alone, unarmed, friendly, almost foolish. He did not fit the pattern of a trap, because he did not fit any pattern at all. He was the one shape Onoda's trained suspicion had no slot for. A harmless boy on a ridiculous quest. And so in February of 1974, after armies had failed for decades, Suzuki walked into the jungle, and in 4 days he found the ghost. Which brings us all the way back to where we began. The clearing, the river, the heat. The rifle raised, finger on the trigger, the boy who did not run. We left them there at the start of this story, frozen in that held breath. Now you know everything that led to it. The school, the order, the failed mission, the 4 men, the leaflets read as lies, the friends lost one by one, the country that buried him alive, the island that called him a devil, all of it pressing down on this one moment, this one pause, this one choice. The rifle is up, Suzuki is talking softly, and Onoda is deciding whether the boy in front of him is a trick like all the others, or something the war never accounted for. This time, he does not pull the trigger. The boy who would not run. Let us go back inside the clearing. Now that you can feel the full weight of it, Onoda has his rifle on Suzuki. Every instinct trained into him over 29 years is screaming the same word. Trap. This is bait. No one finds you by accident. Shoot or vanish. But Suzuki does not behave like bait. He does not flinch toward a weapon. He does not signal hidden men. He just talks. He says the emperor and the people of Japan are worried about him. He uses the name Onoda-san. He treats the ghost like a person. Not a target, not a fugitive to be captured, but a man someone has been missing. And slowly the rifle lowers. They talk. 2 Japanese men, a generation apart, in a jungle, where one of them has been hiding since before the other was born. A strange, careful friendship forms in that clearing. But Suzuki cannot simply walk Onoda out. He tries, and Onoda gives him the answer that tells you everything. About the machine the Nakano school built all those years ago. Onoda says he will not surrender. He will not come down. Not for a boy. Not for the emperor's worry. Not for any leaflet or photo or kind word. He will lay down his arms on one condition and one condition only. He must receive the order to do so in person from a superior officer. He names the man Major Taniguchi, the same Taniguchi who in 1944 looked him in the eye and said, "Come what may, we will come back for you." Think about that. 29 years, a deserter, a buried friend, a dead last companion, a whole country declared at peace, and the man still holds to the exact letter of his training. Only a real order from the right voice can end the war. Nothing less will do. The loop has held all the way to the end. Suzuki understood he could not argue the man out of it, so he did the smart thing. He returned to Japan with photographs as proof that Onoda was alive, in the flesh, still in uniform, still at war. And he carried a promise. He would find Taniguchi. He would bring the one voice that could turn this off. The bookseller goes back to war. Here is a detail that I love, because it captures how much time had really passed. The fearsome Major Taniguchi, commander who once sent a young lieutenant to wreck an island and never surrender. The man whose order had ruled Onoda's entire adult life was by 1974 a bookseller. The war was so long over that the officer who started this had retired into selling books. The voice of God in Onoda's private war was now an ordinary older man behind a counter. That is how dead the war was everywhere except in one man's head. The authorities found Taniguchi. He agreed to go. He flew to Lubang. And on March 9th, 1974, the old major walked into the jungle to meet the soldier he had left there 29 years before. Onoda came to the meeting, and even here, at the very end, his trained mind tried one last time to find the trap. He stood and waited, half expecting Taniguchi to lean in and whisper that the public order was for show, that the real secret orders were still to come, that the war went on. He had spent 29 years certain that the obvious truth was a lie. He could not stop in one instant. Then Taniguchi read the formal order aloud. The 14th Area Army had ceased all combat activity. The Special Squadron was relieved of all duties. Onoda was to lay down his arms and place himself under the nearest command. And Onoda described what happened inside him in words you will not forget. He had been so sure it was a trick that when the truth finally landed, it did not feel like relief. It felt like the floor falling away. He recalled the moment everything went black. He thought in a kind of horror. We really lost the war. How could they have been so sloppy? Read that reaction closely, because it is so revealing. His first thought at learning the truth is not, "My friends died for nothing." It is not, "Those farmers died for nothing." It is anger at the sloppiness. Shame at the loss, the soldier to the very last cell. 29 years, and the war ended not with a battle, but with an old bookseller reading words off a page, and a man finally, after a lifetime of refusing, letting himself believe them. The war was over. For Onoda, on that day, it had just ended. The surrender. The formal surrender came the next day. On March 10th, 1974, at the radar base on Lubang, Onoda gave himself up after holding out 28 years, 6 months, and 8 days since Japan's surrender. Soak in that number. Almost 29 years, roughly 10,400 days of a war that, for everyone else on Earth, had ended in 1945. And then there's what he handed over, which reads like a list from a museum. He turned in his sword, he turned in his rifle, a still working Arisaka Type 99, along with 500 rounds of ammunition, several hand grenades, and the dagger his mother had given him all those years ago, the one meant for an honorable death that his orders had forbidden him to use. He had kept it the entire time, kept everything in working order. He really had been a functioning soldier in his own mind, right to the end, weapons clean, ammunition counted, waiting for the order that finally came. The next day, March 11th, in a ceremony at the Presidential Palace in Manila, Onoda put on his tattered uniform and presented his sword to President Ferdinand Marcos, the leader of the Philippines. And Marcos did something that would anger the island of Lubang for years. He pardoned him. A full pardon for crimes committed while Onoda believed he was at war. Just like that. The 30 dead, the 100 wounded. Emilio Viana bleeding in the thorn bushes. The farmers, the fishermen, the families pushed into poverty. All of it folded into one official word. Pardoned. No trial. No investigation. A handshake, a sword, and a clean slate in the name of keeping the peace between two nations. To the watching world, the story had a perfect ending. The loyal soldier finally came home. The ghost was laid to rest. Roll credits. But you have been paying attention, so you already feel it. This is not the ending. This is the false ending, because the moment Onoda boarded the plane to Japan, the harder, darker, unfinished part of the story was waiting for him. The graves were still on Lubang. The question we planted at the very start was still unanswered, and the man flying home a hero was about to walk straight into a fight he could not win with a rifle. The hero and the hole in the story. Onoda returned to Japan on March 12, 1974, and the country lost its mind over him. Huge crowds met him, the press swarmed. Here was a man declared dead 15 years earlier, walking among them in the flesh, a living piece of the old Japan, the Japan of duty and sacrifice and unbreakable loyalty, returned from the dead at the exact moment the country had become rich, modern, and peaceful. He was a relic and a mirror. People looked at him and saw either everything Japan had lost or everything Japan had escaped. Sometimes both at once. He wrote a memoir that same year. He called it No Surrender, My 30-Year War, and it became a bestseller. He reportedly poured out around 2,000 pages of recollections within months of coming home. The world ate it up. The lone soldier, the unbroken oath, the man who kept faith for 29 years. But there was a hole in the book, a hole shaped exactly like the people he killed. In his memoir, Onoda described his decades of attacking islanders in soft, clean language. He called it guerrilla warfare, guerrilla tactics, the work of a soldier behind enemy lines. He did not lay out the 30 deaths. He did not name Emilio Viana. He did not describe the families in the thorn bushes. The book that made him a hero did its work partly by leaving the victims out. And that is the thing you must never forget about how heroes get made. Sometimes the heroism is real, and sometimes it is just the parts of the story that got left on the cutting room floor. Onoda himself could not fully settle into the legend. He grew uneasy with the fame and disillusioned with the modern Japan he found. A country he felt had drifted from the values he had nearly died for. In April of 1975, he left. He moved to Brazil, following his older brother, and became a cattle rancher. He married in 1976. He built a life on the other side of the world, working the land, far from the cameras. Then, in the 1980s, he came partway back. After reading about a Japanese teenager who murdered his own parents, Onoda was moved to do something for the young. He returned to Japan and founded a nature school, the Onoda Shizen-juku, to teach children survival skills and self-reliance. He split his life between Japan and Brazil for years after that. He received honors. He grew old. And on January 16, 2014, Hiroo Onoda died of heart failure in a Tokyo hospital at the age of 91. That is the clean version. Loyal soldier, hero's welcome. Bestseller, rancher, teacher, honored death at 91. If we stopped there, you would close the video thinking you understood him. We are not going to stop there, because there is a man who lived with Onoda for 3 months, who knew him better than almost anyone, and who reached a conclusion that turns this entire story inside out. The ghostwriter's confession. To write that best-selling memoir, Onoda needed help shaping 2,000 pages of memory into a book. So a writer was brought in to live alongside him and draw the story out. His pen name was Tsuda Shin. He spent about 3 months at Onoda's side in 1974, listening, questioning, building the legend word by word. And what Tsuda came away believing was not the legend. It was something far darker. A few years later, Tsuda wrote his own book. In it, He expressed guilt over the heroic image he had helped create, and he laid out a conclusion that the official story cannot easily absorb. Tsuda came to believe that Onoda likely knew the war was over and that the killings were not real combat at all. He described how the more he pressed Onoda on the central question, "How could you not have known?" the more the answers fell apart. Tsuda wrote that no matter how much I asked him about his perception of the defeat, his explanation was full of contradictions. The more I heard, the more suspicious I became. He looked at one of Onoda's own accounts of ambushing islanders and concluded it was, in his words, clearly a murder, not a fight, because the islanders had no intention to kill anyone. They were just people, working, living, caught. And then there's the line that, once you hear it, you cannot unhear. Tsuda recounted Onoda, describing his own economy of killing, his careful soldier's thrift with bullets. Onoda is reported to have explained that it was wasteful to use one bullet for one person, so he would wait until the islanders lined up before he fired. Wait until they lined up. That is not the language of a confused man defending himself in a war he believes is raging. That is the language of someone managing a task. And it is exactly why the counter-narrative refuses to die. Pull the seeds back out of your pocket now. The transistor radio from around 1965. The looted newspapers. The family photographs held in his own hands. Tsuda's 3 months of contradictions. Critics put these together and ask the obvious, brutal question. How does a trained intelligence officer, with a radio, with newspapers, with photos, with decades of evidence, honestly fail to understand that the war is over? Maybe, they argue, at some point, the not knowing became a decision, a shelter, a story he needed to be true so that the killing could stay being war. Both things at once. Now, in fairness, because this is history and not a courtroom drama, you have to hear the other side too, and hear it honestly. The claim that Onoda knew is an interpretation. It is not a proven fact. Reputable accounts call it highly disputed and impossible to confirm. His defenders point to the very real power of the sealed mind, the documented fixed ideas he confessed to, the way deep isolation and total certainty can genuinely warp what a person is able to believe. People in that state really can hear news of peace and twist it into proof of war. It happens. The mind is that strong and that strange. And the deepest version of the counter-evidence, Tsuda's conclusion, comes filtered through Tsuda's own guilt and through later translations and reporting. The underlying claim that Onoda knew remains an interpretation, not a confession. So here is where honest history leaves us. And I'm not going to pretend it leaves us somewhere tidy. On one side stands the legend, a soldier given an impossible order by a system designed to make him obey it forever. A man whose training sealed his mind so completely that he honestly could not let the truth in, who kept faith for 29 years at a cost almost no one could pay, and who wept when he finally learned the war was lost. On the other side stands the accusation. A man who, by his own ghostwriter's account, likely understood far more than he admitted. A man who waited for unarmed farmers to line up so he would not waste a bullet. A man whose memoir made a hero by erasing the dead. And the thing is, you do not actually get to choose just one. The most honest answer this story allows is that both can be partly true. He can be a victim of a monstrous order and the author of monstrous acts. He can be sincerely lost in a sealed mind and still responsible for the bodies in the fields. Loyalty and atrocity are not opposites here. On Lubang, they were the same 29 years, seen from two different sides of the mountain. That is the unfinished fight. Onoda flew home into in 1974, and it is the one his pardon and his bestseller could never really win. Because while Japan was throwing him a hero's welcome, the island of Lubang was still counting its graves. And there was one more group of people whose story sets Onoda's in its true and final light. The other ghosts. The other men who, like him, never got the order to stop. The other ghosts. Onoda was not alone in his refusal, and seeing the others around him is the only way to measure him correctly. After the war, Japanese soldiers called the holdouts by a name that means, roughly, remaining soldiers. There were a lot of them. More than 120 stragglers were rounded up across the Pacific between 1947 and 1974. Men who fought on out of disbelief, isolation, fear of execution, or honor. Most hid quietly and harmed no one. A few became famous, and two of them sit right beside Onoda in history, one just before him and one just after. 2 years before Onoda came down, in January of 1972, a sergeant named Shoichi Yokoi was found on the island of Guam after nearly 28 years in hiding. Here's the difference that matters. Yokoi had known by around 1952 that the war was probably over. He stayed hidden anyway, not because he thought the war raged on, but because he was too ashamed to come back, too bound by the old code that said surrender was disgrace. When he finally returned, his words became a famous saying in Japan, full of that shame. He spoke of returning with great embarrassment. Yokoi hid out of honor and fear. He did not, by most accounts, spend those years killing. And then there is the man who came after Onoda, who matters most of all for what he reveals about the legend. His name was Teruo Nakamura. He was found growing crops alone on an Indonesian island and surrendered in December of 1974, about 10 months after Onoda. That makes Nakamura, not Onoda, the last confirmed holdout of the entire war. Onoda is the second to last. But look closer at Nakamura, because here the story exposes something ugly. Nakamura was born Atun Palalan. He was an Amis Aboriginal from Taiwan, which was then under Japanese colonial rule. He was not ethnically Japanese, and so when he finally came in, he was treated differently. He initially received far smaller compensation than a man like Onoda. He was sent not to Japan, but back to Taiwan, the same empire that turned Onoda into a celebrated symbol of loyalty, gave its non-Japanese holdout a smaller welcome and a quieter place in the story. He died in 1979, far less famous than the man he outlasted. Set the three of them side by side, and Onoda comes into focus. Yokoi hid in shame, knowing. Nakamura survived alone and was half forgotten for not being Japanese enough. Onoda alone held out under a true and explicit order, killed across decades, and came home to a hero's welcome and a bestseller. The legend did not just happen to him. It was chosen out of more than 120 men. The country lifted up the one whose story flattered it the most and looked away from the parts that did not. Closing the loops, let us bring the threads home, the way I promised at the start. We began with three things: the problem, the doubt, and the dead. The problem was a man who would not stop fighting. We can name its source now with precision. It was not simple madness. It was an order given by a system, the Nakano school, built to make a man obey until a specific human voice released him. They removed his off switch on purpose, then lost the one hand that could flip it back. He kept fighting because they engineered a man who could do nothing else. The doubt was whether he truly believed. And the honest answer, the one good history gives you instead of an easy one, is that we cannot be sure. His own ghostwriter, who knew him best, came away believing he likely knew, and that the killings were not combat. Others insist his sealed mind was real. The claim that he knew remains an interpretation, not a proven fact. So we are left holding both, a victim of an order, and possibly the author of a long deception, in the same two hands. And the dead. We did not skip them, and we will not skip them now. Around 30 islanders killed. Roughly 100 wounded. Emilio Viana and the cup of coffee and the thorn bushes, the devils of the mountains. Families who lost the people who fed them on an island that should have had nothing to do with a world war. The pardon erased their case in an afternoon. The memoir erased it on the page. But it happened, and the people of Lubang have never stopped knowing it happened. Here is the recontextualizing image I want to leave you with. There is a memoir on a shelf, translated in libraries, easy to find, called No Surrender. It looks like a hero's story. The cover, the title, The legend, all of it says loyalty and endurance and a soldier's faith. Pick it up and it reads like one of the great survival tales of the century. But it is not only that. It is a book with a hole in it, exactly the shape of 30 graves. And once you know the hole is there, you can never read the book the same way again. The heroism and the erasure are printed on the same pages, in the same ink. What to look up, and why it matters. If any part of you doubts the dark half of this story, good, doubt it. Then go and check, because the trail is real, and it has names. Read the obituaries from when he died, the ones that recorded the islanders killed, even as they marveled at his endurance. Look up the ghostwriter, Tsuda Shin, and the book he wrote out of guilt. Look up the historian Beatrice Trefault, who studies these holdouts and Japan's memory of the war. Look up the filmmaker Mia Stewart, great niece of Emilio Viana, and her documentary built around the victim's side, the side that no one has ever asked about. The story even sits in government files. The United States National Archives holds State Department telegrams about Onoda's surrender, plain official paper marking the day the war finally ended for one man. His story has been told and retold in a 2021 film, and in the great director Werner Herzog's dreamlike novel about him. Most of those tellings reach for the legend, the lone soldier, the unbroken oath. Fewer of them walk down the mountain to where the farmers lived. I wanted this one to do both, because a man is not honestly remembered until you can hold his loyalty and his victims in the same hand without dropping either. So picture him one last time. Not in the crowd in Tokyo, not on the magazine covers. Picture him back in the clearing on that February morning, rifle raised at a smiling boy, his whole sealed world balanced on whether to pull the trigger. 29 years of an order, 29 years of certainty, 30 graves behind him in the hills, and one question that even now no one can fully answer, the question we opened with. Did he already know? If this is the kind of history you want more of, the kind that keeps the loyalty and the cost in the same frame, and refuses to flatten either one, subscribe and tell me where you land in the comments. Do you think Hiroo Onoda truly